So, as a fan of Nioh 2, and, well, having played Nioh 1, maybe not enjoyed as much, I'll be drawing a lot of comparisons to those two games, and I think that's fair considering most of this game draws from Nioh anyway. Same depths, many of the same assets, many of the same issues, and some of the highlights. So let's see how Wo Long's bosses stack up and rank them from worst to best, using these tiers right here on the screen. And keep in mind this is all based on my first playthrough and my own specific build. Maybe you had a different experience from mine, and if so, be sure to share it. So let's begin at the awful tier. Whoopee. I've gone through all 5 stages of grief with this boss fight. When I first encountered him, I just could not believe my eyes. I was sure I was missing something. It's a gimmick, it's a ruse. There's a way you can dispel all the illusions the boss summons. I missed something. I must have. This is not the boss fight. But no, it is real. This is what they've done. It's like Kashin Koji's clone move, except that's the entire boss fight. In a game with Sekiro-style combat no less, which, by the way, has never worked for ganks. They all have identical movesets, they attack individually, your lock-on goes all over the place, they can chain moves together in a bullshit way, you might spirit break an enemy and be about to repose them, only for an off-screen projectile hitting you and interrupting it. The only way they, tried, which is a word I'm hesitant to use here, the word try is really not present at all, but the only way they sort of made it more manageable is by giving the clones very low damage values, which does make it a lot easier than it would be if they could all one-shot you for sure. But that doesn't change how fundamentally broken this fight is. Mechanically, it just doesn't work. Regardless of the stats, you do have an ally for this mission, but when it's 10 versus 2, it doesn't really matter. And if you kill all the clones, he'll go into phase 2 and summon, guess what? More clones, and he himself gains a bunch more moves. But if you leave a clone or two alive, you can just kill him without ever seeing phase 2. I've seen it once. He had this kinda cool aerial move, but that's not enough for me to wanna deal with a second batch of bullshit clones. So I ended up killing him in his phase 1, which was tedious and boring. Also, this guy literally has a combo copy-pasted from Nioh 1. He has the exact same spinny jump move as Maria. You thought I wouldn't notice, did you, Team Ninja? Yeah, I noticed it, you cheap fox! I really can't emphasize enough how garbage this boss is. Tao Tai, Tao Tie, whatever the fuck, is another one of Team Ninja's attempts at a colossal boss. If you're new to Nioh games, they've basically made the same fight in every game, and it sucked every single time. Gacha Dokuro and Daidarabochi were at least attempts at interesting gimmicks, but Tao Tai is just a giant jumping punching bag. It's kind of a gimmick fight, but it's immediately obvious what you're supposed to do, tickle his feet until he falls over. Wow, what an exciting twist. It's extremely easy, and for being a spectacle-only fight, you can't see 90% of it when you're giving him a foot massage. But when he falls over, seemingly dead, only to come back and starts crawling around in the surprise second health bar, it does manage to pull off that body horror they were going for. Now you can actually properly appreciate all the disgusting details, like eyes and limbs growing where they shouldn't. At that brief moment I had of the monstrosity looking at me dead in the eye sent chills down my spine. But his main attack is once again jumping, and then he's dead. At least it's pretty funny how you can deflect this shopping mall-sized monster with your little toothpick of a sword. So that cool design that's only visible for the last portion of the fight is enough to keep it out of the awful tier for me, but not beyond that. Yuan Shao is the penultimate boss of the final real level in the game, and he's been hyped up throughout the game quite a bit. And then he turns into a fat turtle. He's extremely slow, has low health, couldn't hit the ocean from a boat, and leaves himself wide open for half his attacks, which again, always tend to miss. Even his fatal strikes are embarrassingly slow, like look at this shit. Even when I fuck up the timing on this one, it still misses, at point blank range. Sometimes he tries blocking me with the turtle shell, but even then he misses the block. Bro, your shield had one job. One job. The blocking just adds nothing to the fight, either it's free damage or you gotta wait until he lowers the shield. This guy is like Godric if he grafted the brain of a starfish and the eyes of a sea urchin onto himself. I was fully expecting this to have a second health bar like Tao Tai, but no, that's it, that's the fight. I redid the fight at a lower rank to see if maybe I missed out on something good by killing it too quickly, but no. He just feels unfinished. There's a lot of jankiness in his animations and attacks. For example, when you counter one of his fatal strikes, the one where he tosses the shell, your lock-on stays on it even after it's disappeared. As for phase 2, I think I killed him before he managed to enter it the first time around. And when I did it again, I could only tell the phase 2 existed because the music changed. The only thing I can say I like is how he kinda moves like a robot, even has icy steam coming off him. If they made him a real boss, maybe he'd be good? Look guys, I'm sorry, but I have to say it. This boss is boring. We could have avoided this pun if this boss was actually decent. It doesn't really have any bad mechanics, so I think it deserves to be higher than the bad tier. They tried doing something with the braziers that you can use to set the beast on fire, but it's barely worth kiting him around for it to happen. It doesn't really do any damage, it's quicker to just fight it straight on. Since I have practically nothing to say about this boss, I think now is a good time to mention how the reinforcement system affects the ranking. It's tricky because some missions have allies with you by default, and others do not. So I think it's fair to criticize bosses made far too easy with reinforcements you're given by default, but not for solo missions, where you have to use a consumable item to summon them. But in almost all the cases I did the fights both with allies and without, so if they're magically 10 times better with one approach, I'll be sure to mention it. It has basically no effect on the boar though, I'm sorry to say. Zhang Jiao, Jesus Christ, these names are gonna kill me, is a big hairy dude who conjures up tornadoes, lightning and earthquakes. He's like a giant ape shaman, so that's kinda neat. But I feel he's a bit out of place in Wo Long. His attacks just don't feel like they mesh with the game too well. The dust splashes, earthquakes, or whatever this brown shit is supposed to be, can be deflected or jumped over, which is nice. I like having multiple different counters for attacks. The more approaches, the better. But there's no need to counter them, you can just tank it and hit the boss, because all it does is slightly damage your spirit. But you gain spirit back by hitting the boss, so just hit the boss and you not only negate it, but you also get free hits in. And I think either the size of the boss or the camera, or probably both really, make some of his moves hard to see coming, especially the quick claw swipes. As soon as you can tell what's going on, it's mostly a joke and dies under a minute, especially if you're using the help of reinforcements. He takes insane damage from having his spirit broken, which makes it satisfying in a way, but also unsatisfactory for a big main story boss. So I'd say he's like top of mediocre, bottom of decent. Up to you. Oh wait, no, it's up to me, so he's top of mediocre. I liked Guardian Ape as an early game challenge, but he's made retroactively uninteresting by having him just become a regular enemy later on. So I'm kinda unsure, should I rank him based on how it was the first time I encountered it, or how I feel about it now in context of the full game? I thought he was well placed in the second mission, and I definitely liked it more than the boar, at first anyway. All the mechanics are crystal clear and fun enough to counter. He doesn't have much combo variety or a second phase, but he's a good follow-up for the tutorial boss, who gave you a taste of this sort of big demon bosses. But to give Zuyan some credit, he's the only time I had to actually put some effort into fighting this particular type of demon. Outside of this mission, they're laughably easy to kill, and I'm pretty sure Zuyan has like 1 or 2 new moves. And I think he's a bit bigger as well, so I'm slightly leaning towards decent tier. Hua Xian should be in F tier solely for having the worst name to pronounce in the entire game, but I think I can kinda forgive him because he's a fun fight. He can be encountered at the front gate, but you could fight him basically anywhere in the level cause he'll follow you to the ends of the earth. While it's cool to duel a fellow warrior on a field of battle, I don't think the ballistas scattered around the entire area do this fight any favors. I was able to mostly ignore them by staying on the move, but it's still a crappy inclusion, it doesn't add anything to the fight. Also, this man has a move taken straight from Nioh 2 as well, but you know what, fuck Maeda Toshie. He's one of many poorly balanced human fights in Nioh, and Hua Xian is what the game's humans wishes they were. So you know what, go ahead, yoink his shit. His most fun moves are definitely the critical strikes, even if they do make him a lot easier. It's fast-paced, fun, not very challenging, but it's a good mini-boss, basically. And you get a full-blown boss right after, so it's definitely not disappointing. Baisha is an unfortunate specimen as she's stuck in the same mission as Zhang Rang, but right before finishing her off I decided to try again solo, and I found her to be much better that way. I like her normal attacks being accompanied by snake bites with a delay, so a single hit from her requires 2 deflections, both timed right. Another highlight is her launching into the walls of the arena and circling around before jumping at you. Not a very special fight or anything, but I do recommend telling your friend to take a backseat so you can have some private fun with this snake lady. Yuji and the embodiment of demonic chi is pretty much the climax of the game. It's set up as the final boss, but spoiler alert, there's a surprise real final boss after this. It's like Kelly and Yamato no Orochi in Nioh 1, they also had a surprise epilogue final boss after that. Why they'd rather pay homage to that boss over Otakemaru is beyond me, but I think thematically it gets the job done. Yuji, the Taoist in black, much like Kelly, is an absolute pushover. It's not even funny. Because story-wise, he's obviously meant to be the most dangerous opponent you've ever faced, considering Lubu, the mightiest warrior of all men, couldn't land a hit on him. But in this fight, it's Yuji who can't land a hit on me because he has no poise. Pretty much every single attack or spell he does you can interrupt by just hitting him, except for the fatal strikes. I only know this is where the game devs wanted you to put to use all the lessons you've learned throughout the game because they literally made an NPC shout it out loud. A great final boss doesn't need to tell you that. But the only lesson I put to use here is how I remember the tutorial boss was trivialized by the same tactic. Just spam. So good job, your finale of the game is on the same level as your beginner boss. I do like Yuji's moveset if he does get the chance to use it though, but I'll talk more about that when we get to Blindfolded Boy. As for the embodiment of demonic chi, the poster monster of the game, it's a spectacle boss done half right. Sometimes it works, other times the camera or the clunky movement of the boss creates awkward moments where it's hard to tell what's happening. Especially when you try hitting the boss at its neutral, where if you go too close the camera just flips out. It's very awkward to hit the boss with most weapons, but thankfully mine had the perfect attack to reach it from the air. It's overall an easy fight, I got it first try, which I'd rather not do for what I assumed was the last boss. But I can't deny I did enjoy the ride. It's a cool fight, looks great, and some of the mechanics are kinda fun, like when the dragon swirls through the ground, or around you in the air before closing in. Maybe with a higher budget or more effort put in the gameplay, it could have been great. We've made it to the good tier, so it should be smooth sailing from here on out. Zhang Bao is like an elite version of the warlocks you encounter throughout the entire game, and also feels like a better done General of Heaven in all aspects. Both are spellcasters, but General of Earth feels more well-suited for the mechanics of the game. He covers the entire arena with fire rings, but since they actually do damage, you'll have to either jump over them or deflect them. You can't just tank it like you could with Zhang Jiao's Dust or whatever that was. All his melee attacks are much more satisfying to counter, and his OST is one of the better ones in the game. It's very catchy. Though his intro cutscene isn't very flattering for him. Like a classic villain, he kills his own minion, but it appears it did nothing more than first-degree burns at most. How did he even die from that? Halfway through the fight he summons more warlocks to buff him, which isn't a particularly exciting gimmick, but I'm fine with it since this is the same mission that introduced that mechanic throughout the level. So they're just putting you to the test and makes it feel like the level itself wasn't just a waste of time. I'm putting him as a low good, low B, because the first phase is a bit too bare bones. There's not much going on. Second phase is good, I just wish that was the entire fight. After Zangrang, I was hoping Team Ninja would never attempt at making a gank fight ever again. But you know what, they kinda won me back over by making Ornstein and Smo, straight up. It's the classic setup of one is big, fat and slow, and the other skinny and agile. Why is it done so much? Because it works. Wen Chao's massive hammer is very fun to deflect, and Yang Liang's odd gangly ass spinning around and jumping is fun to look at. They have one move where they do a coordinated attack, with Wen Chao throwing Yang Liang, and that's something I always want to see more of from duo fights. It's what made the Valkyries in God of War Ragnarok great, but other than that they do have independent AIs. But it's fine, you have an ally with you by default who'll often take aggro of one of them and let you fight the other. And I like that in the opening cutscene Yang Liang is killed and Wen Chao arrives to resurrect him, which is a subtle way of telling you you're gonna have to kill them around the same time so they won't get to resurrect one another. I tried this fight solo as well, and mostly it works because the other one will be extremely passive. I don't feel like their fight exceeds the premise much though. They don't really take it to a whole other level. It's just a perfectly functional gank fight, and they're individually good enough. After some of the previous bosses were feeling kinda samey, even if enjoyable, I was happy to get something different, even if it wasn't earth-shattering. Or I guess it was. Thanks, Wen Chowder. As the first boss in my top 10, we have the first boss of the game, Zhang Liang, General of Man. He loves himself some man. Even though he's a big bulky guy, he's plagued by the same weaknesses Hu Zion and Yuji of not having any goddamn poise. Sekiro's answer to this problem was having the bosses be able to deflect your attack, giving them a turn to strike back. And even Wolong itself had the solution that they decided not to use until the final boss. But it is the tutorial boss, so I think it's more forgivable here, and he does punish reckless spam by sometimes doing a fatal strike you can't stagger him out of, or jumping in the air where he's safe out of your reach. It's pretty fun. But mostly I really like this fight for phase 2. This is an actually challenging fight and a good preparation for the rest of the game. He has long-range delayed tentacle arm swipes that require careful timing on your end, and once you've hurt his feelings enough he'll start doing surprise follow-ups to his combos, as well as consecutive fatal strikes. With many bosses you're safe to do your big heavy attacks after countering a single fatal strike, but the handful of bosses that can surprise you with a second strike are all the better for it in my mind. Team Ninja really loves their sad white tiger bosses, don't they? But this time it's a giant, Chad, muscular humanoid cat boy. Like me, except I'm not a furry. Or muscular. He's mid-B tier for me because while he's at first really damn cool, he's lacking in combo variations. I think he really needs them because with companions that you get by default once again, he's not challenging enough, and on his own he's quite slow and predictable. The only move he often alters is his tail thrust that he can follow up with a ballet dance move, which is by far his most fun ability and often caught me off guard. I love single attacks that you need to deflect multiple times to avoid getting hit by. He's also got the Godfrey Stomp, which you can also jump over, just like Godfrey's AoEs. And I again also love abilities that you have multiple different counters for, such as deflecting or jumping. And come to think of it, that move also has a surprise follow-up grab sometimes. This is like the alternate universe where it's Godfrey's lion that killed him and absorbed his power for phase 2. His music kinda sucks though, so change the music, make him a little faster, have more variety with his base melee attacks, and we're golden. Lil Bay is one of few flying bosses in this game, and he could have been the best one, if not for a single attack that I think is fucking terrible. It's one where he throws down lightning bolts around the arena, which will shoot out lightning in all directions. And he can be so goddamn spammy with the move it almost ruins the otherwise great fight. When the balls land in front of you, it's fine, you just have to do some extra deflections. That's okay, but since they're spread out, it's very likely the boss will end up landing somewhere between them, and you won't be able to keep all the threats on screen at the same time. I never like off-screen projectiles. It's stupid, it's bullshit. Whenever he's not doing it, I'm having a blast. It's so fast-paced and you're constantly on the move, as is the boss, and the music is nice to listen to. His multi-hit attacks and the aerial charges are exhilarating to counter. You can jump over his tail, and the lightning that tracks into you instead of on the ground is a good addition. So just, for the love of God, remove those goddamn balls! Neuter this fucker! We've got another fucking Zang. Jesus Christ, these names are gonna get easier to confuse than Elden Rings that start with G, R, or M. So I instead often refer to him as Zabby Boy. And to me, he's basically a Neo-Samurai boss done right. He even has a living weapon buff like many Neo bosses did. And with it, he's unstaggerable. Good, because I really love deflecting his combos. They're fun, varied enough, fast and deadly. It's a good time. And I think the lightning strikes not only look great, but are a fun addition. They make you mind your positioning or the number of deflects you have to pull off. I don't know why they decided to have his main story fight take place indoors though. Kind of a bad idea if you want to incorporate lightning into the mix. By far his most fun combo is the triple mid-air spin, followed by lightning strikes in front of him. And by far his most deadliest is the super long-range thrusting nightmare. Jesus Christ, it killed me so many times before I learned it. I'd say he's like very near great tier material, just maybe not quite impactful enough. Well, out of all the names to pronounce, I think we've found the absolute worst one. I'd say it's fitting considering how it looks. I think this is my favorite design of a boss in the entire game, probably even more so than embodiment of demonic Chi and Tatooine. It's a horse blob monster with hair tentacles and a gaping butthole in his chest that can shit out eyes. And despite the size and potato shape, it's actually pretty damn good at keeping you away from its sides and back, which I thought would be his weakness, but not really. And the base moves he likes to mix up quite a bit, some being very delayed and others coming surprisingly quick. I could see some finding it very easy, but for me those quick slams and sudden fatal strikes were dangerous. I died quite a few times here, even when I replayed the mission. And the reason I replayed it was because I've been on the fence the entire time if is top of good or bottom of great. Looks are amazing, moveset is quite solid, it's fun. Is it good enough to be great tier? A tier? The only downside I can think of is how the ice attacks are kinda poorly telegraphed. It's hard to see when he's charging up his little hole. So I'm gonna cop out and just put this boss as Groot, a combination of good and great. Dongzuo caught me off guard because so far most humans can be deflected as soon as they start their attack animations, whereas Long Dongzuo delays his wind-ups for ages, for most of his attacks including his fatal strikes. But then he also has the sudden knife throws, jab from the butt of the spear and other fatal strikes that are surprisingly quick. He also has quite a handful of combo mix-ups and different follow-ups. I've been mentioning both as positives quite a few times in this video, and maybe there are some that don't see the value in that and prefer being able to predict exactly how the combo ends once it starts. It's fair enough if you do, but for me bosses like Dongzuo have the unique quality of remaining engaging even once you fully learn their moveset. He's kinda similar to Lu Bu in that aspect, I think they even share one finisher move. I was kinda expecting something a bit more dramatic though, considering how major of a villain he was. I thought maybe he'd go apeshit in desperation or use a last resort tactic, but all he does is gain a handful of more moves in phase 2, even though they are good moves. So it lacks lasting impact in a sense, it wasn't all that grand. So he's low grade tier for me. but the music was pretty great, I'll give him that. Lu Bu was for me the one and maybe only character I was invested in to an extent, and this fight is the culmination of his story. All the terrible things he did came down to him trying to stop Yuji, and he didn't land a single blow on him. Then he becomes a horse. I'm pretty sure I see some Nightmare Bringer DNA in here, a couple of his moves look quite similar, and it wouldn't surprise me. But even if so, I quickly forget about Nightmare Bringer because this fight certainly stands out enough on its own. He puts Dongzhuo to shame with how delayed some of his swings are, but I really like how in phase 2 his halberd flashes right before the hit, so there's a clear visual cue for when to deflect. It's appreciated as it could otherwise be a little hard to see with all the flame effects. I can't quite put it to words how damn satisfying it is to deflect this giant flaming halberd, or the many explosions he does. His signature moves from the first fight also make a reappearance, as well as a remix of his theme. Even though I think he deserved something a bit cooler than a centaur form, and completely failing his quest to kill Yuji, the fire and the explosions do add the theatricality I was hoping for from this encounter. I'm not even gonna attempt to butcher this boss's name, he's just Birdie Boy. I have to say, this guy's intro cutscene fucking sucks. It's so unbelievably forced. They were running out of ideas on how to make all these historical figures into big demon bosses for you to fight, so they just had a random guy with a crossbow shoot him in the eye with an elixir-infused arrow, which then turns him into a demon on the spot. I mean, thank you random asshole, he gave us one of the better bosses in the game. He's got the best bits of both Demon Lu Bu and Liu Bei. He can fly, but also explosions and fire everywhere. Also, no lightning bolts, and a couple super delayed slams to make sure you're paying attention. And of course a big fuck-off scythe to round out this gentleman. Hell yeah. I like the use of the continuous fire emitting from him that will stick to the ground and damage you if you step on it. It's a small thing, but makes all his flying around have more purpose than just for the sake of flying being cool. You have to actually mind your positioning. But speaking of flying for the sake of being cool, his phase 2 transition makes it look like he's using a damn jetpack. He's not even flapping his wings, dude's just got a turbo engine in his ass. His moveset is very solid, but not quite varied and interesting enough to be in the highest possible tier. You have no idea how relieved I was that this guy ended up being the real final boss, not demonic embodiment. Who cares about Yuji when we have blindfolded boy? Even though technically it is Yuji since he's possessed by him or something. But almost all the moves that came back from Yuji I didn't even realize were in the original fight because I never had to pay attention. Now I do. And some of them are altered in a clever way, and he has enough new moves to stand out as a completely unique fight. Moveset-wise, this fight is absolute top tier. He starts out with infinite poise, but upon being out of spirit he'll revert to a more typical humanoid that staggers. Except he can assume a stance in which he'll deflect anything you throw at him and retaliate. But the retaliation itself is deflectable, so it becomes a really nice back and forth dance, reminding me of some of Sekiro's better bouts. He's also the absolute king of consecutive fatal strikes. He can do 3 in a row and pretty much always does at least 2 in quick succession. This fight is actually a test of all the challenges you've faced thus far, without the need of the game shouting it at you. He has the widest assortment of different patterns and abilities. You could probably have 10 fights with him in a row and every time you'd see something new. I think the downside of that is that a lot of those abilities are ranged projectiles, which can be a little annoying if he gets spammy with them. And because of his small size, it's hard to see his melee animations all that well sometimes. This is why humanoid bosses are often made bigger than the player model, for clarity's sake. There's no doubt he's great, I'm only unsure if he's top of great or bottom of amazing. Some fights he's definitely S tier, other fights A tier. I don't think I've ever had this much difficulty deciding on tiers as I have in this video. But I have no question about the tier for Lu Bu, mightiest among men. This is the easiest S of my life. Let me share my first experience with him a bit. It seemed like I did fuck all for damage. I was stuck fighting him for 3 to 4 hours. He was by far the hardest boss in the game for me, and even when I did finally beat him, it was a well over 5 minutes long battle. And not once did I get frustrated or bored or felt like I had been cheated. It was absolutely the good boss of the game for me. I was shit at the game prior to this boss, but much better after. It's 100% fair and yet a greater challenge than the likes of Zhang Rang, who rely on bullshit. But maybe I'm just overwhelmed by initial hype, right? Nah, I've gone back to this mission a lot, and I've actually gained more and more appreciation for Lu Bu. When it comes to combo mix-ups, he's absolutely the best one at it. He can follow up his thrust with a jump attack, and that jump attack he can follow up with a wide swing sometimes, or his signature fire explosion leap. And that jump attack can be a follow-up to other moves as well, including his normal over the right shoulder swing. He can also follow up the thrust with a longer thrust combo, or he can do the explosion leap. Once you've done some damage to him, he starts introducing more potential follow-ups, such as this devastating 7-hit combo. And fuck me, it's the most fun attack to deflect in the entire game. I'm barely scratching the surface of how many variations he has up his sleeves. This boss will never get old. If we were to compare Lu Bu to Neo, I think he might just be my favorite of all the bosses. Even more so than Tase Eboshi, maybe. The only thing I can't say I love is how simple the horseback movement is. But it can be done extremely quick if you just bait out the fatal strike by staying right in front of him. I've learned this boss to the point that what was initially almost 6 minutes long can be done in about 3 minutes now, with the same build roughly. There's just something about Lu Bu that clicks perfectly for me. Call me cringe if you want, but somehow he makes me think of Artorias from Dark Souls a little bit. There's only one way I know for sure I could make this boss even better. Well, that was Wo Long, and I didn't even make any Wo Long puns, unlike in my community post. I'm proud of myself. I'd say boss quality was overall good, and it kept me interested even when the missions themselves became a chore by the end. Enemy variety has never been Team Ninja's strong suit, and it reached new levels of abysmal in this game. I honestly can't believe it, but maybe I'll save more of my thoughts on Wo Long for a separate video. Let me know what you thought about the bosses, about the game, about the video, and I'll see you next time.